The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Cosmic Catastrophe on Revolution.radio, the #1 listener-supported internet radio. And that means it's your duty to become a member or a Patreon and support the work that they're doing over there to protect freedom of speech. I'm your host, Diamond, from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, as you can see by all of the flair. And this is my lovely co-host, Leah Shaper, who will be joining us today.
Hello.
Today's show is an exciting show. We are going to be talking about the largest cosmic catastrophe in recent memory. And what I mean by that is the largest impact by a comet or asteroid is the KT boundary. You all know it by the KT boundary or the end of the dinosaurs, however you want to call it. We're going to dissect the event and that period of time on Earth, which, by the way, is the largest mass extinction in recent geologic history.
We should also note that it is also called the KPG boundary now. So we have to change all of our terminology. So it was the Cretaceous tertiary extinction, and now it is the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event, mass extinction, or boundary.
Can you see this page?
I can.
So yeah, we're going to be talking about the KT event or the Cretaceous Paleogene event, which it is now called. But you can call it by either of them, and some of the older geologists will never change. It will always be the KT.
Well, and then you have the other confusion of the K for Cretaceous instead of C or CR. And as you informed me yesterday, C is reserved for Cambrian. So we use K for Cretaceous.
That's how it works. So first, I'm going to go over the geology and the history of how this boundary was found and the mass extinction unfolded through time. It's all pretty recent. It's all happened within the last, let's say, high resolution 45 years of understanding what happened here on this boundary. It's very similar to the Younger Dryas event. So the only analog for this is the Younger Dryas event if we go more recent geologic history. And it's basically the same type of event. Yeah, the only difference is the Younger Dryas event was a little less deadly.
Right, a little less deadly, and I guess you could argue as well that there isn't really evidence for like mass burning of plant fuels, creating a carbon layer, right? We don't see that here.
There is evidence for that, actually, at the Cretaceous.
Oh, there is?
Yes, absolutely. We're going to get into that.
Okay. Well.
And at an even larger scale, like fire and brimstone type stuff.
Wow. Okay, well, count me corrected.
So let's talk about the background geology here, just to bring you up to speed on how recent this is. The estimated age for the extinction event or the KT boundary or the Cretaceous Paleocene transition, whatever you want to call it, is 65.5 million years ago. Now, for context, prior to that, the dinosaurs ruled Earth for 190 million years. So so the KT boundary is recent compared to how long the dinosaurs ruled Earth, 190 million years. And for humanity or hominids, let's say upright hominids, 5.3 million years ago. So here's the interesting thing we're going to talk about in the second half of the show. Our ancestors actually were cohabitating with dinosaurs, and they made it past the KT boundary, and the dinosaurs didn't.
But to be clear, we're not talking about, really direct ancestors. We're talking about mammals that have placentas.
Yeah, animals that it's going to take 60 million years before we get hominids.
Yeah.
Yep. So there are no hominids running around with dinosaurs, just
Right.
maybe small things that look like mice.
Yeah.
Okay, there it is. So 65 million years ago or so, about 70% of all species living on Earth disappeared within a very short period of time. In many areas, it's represented literally by a boundary, like the Younger Dryas boundary, where there's this interesting clay layer that about 50 years ago people started spotting, and they were wondering just what it was that happened there that made the dinosaurs extinct. Paleontologists speculated and theorized for many years what could have caused this mass extinction, known as the KT event, or Cretaceous Tertiary Mass Extinction, which is now referred to as the Cretaceous Paleogene mass extinction. And it was about 1980 that Alvarez, Asaro, and Michel reported the discovery on a peculiar sedimentary clay layer. And that's the one I was just referring to. That was laid down at the time of this extinction event, which showed enormous amounts of the rare earth element iridium. And this is like the beginning of the cosmic catastrophe stuff. The only way you can get a heavy element in this amount on the surface is if it came from an object from space, because all of the heavy elements from Earth have sunk toward the core.
Right.
They don't exist. So if you find a layer of this element that shows up, it's probably because of a big impactor.
But it could also be from volcanism, correct?
Iridium, yeah.
Yeah. Or both.
So this layer was first seen near Gubbio, Italy. The same enhancement was soon discovered to be worldwide in about a 1 centimeter layer, both on land and sea. We have this iridium enhancement. The Alvarez team and other rare earth elements such as platinum, osmium, ruthenium, rhodium, and palladium are believed to have been carried down to Earth. So all the heavy elements were carried down to the core, and they found these heavy elements in this layer. So that is very suspect, especially back in 1980. What they did know back then was primitive chondritic meteorites, a specific type of meteorite, still have these particular abundances of these elements. But the only problem was this rock had to be ginormous. So this is the first time scientists are like, in order to get this concentration, we need an asteroid that's at least 6 miles wide.
Yeah.
That is pretty significant.
That's like,
pretty significant.
from the ground to what, the level of the altitude of like a commercial flight, isn't it?
Yes.
Isn't that about right?
Yeah, 30,000 they fly it. Yeah.
So that gives you an idea of the size of such an object.
It would be the size of a major city, the width of it across.
Yeah.
Like the width of Philadelphia.
crashing into Earth.
Okay, so since the original discovery, many other pieces of evidence have come to light that strongly support the impact theory, not just the rare earth elements. Many of you know of the discovery of the Chicxulub crater. High temperatures generated by this impact of an object 6 miles or wider, as you were alluding to, this would have caused enormous fires and would also cause a huge area of molten material on the surface of Earth from the impact.
Yeah.
So it would have been insane. Not only that, it would darken the skies for years or decades and drop the temperature precipitously. So geologists who preferred other explanations for the KT event said, show us the crater in 1990. And guess what? Cosmochemist named Alan Hildebrand became aware of geophysical data taken 10 years earlier by geophysicists looking for oil in the Yucatan, where they found a 112-mile diameter ring structure that they called Chicxulub. And it fit exactly what would be expected from a 65 million year old impact from a 6 mile wide rock.
By the way, yesterday I learned that, and I think it's pronounced Chicxulub.
Okay.
Not club at the end, but
oh yeah, it's Chicxulub.
Chicxulub. Yeah. Yesterday I saw that apparently I think I hope this is correct, that the information about the crater was available to scientists doing oil and gas work in like the 1950s, but they kept it secret for decades.
Yep.
Which is like, that's hysterical.
Well, maybe it's because if you know where an impactor is, you know where the oil is.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're not going to share that with anyone.
No. And so I guess it was like a little bit of sleuthing that somebody eventually found this out.
Yep. And so is born Chicxulub crater. And the Chicxulub crater was then dated by a team using argon 40, argon 39 method. And guess what? It came up 65 million years old. Now, such an impact this size would have caused, the tidal waves we talk about in the Younger Dryas?
Yeah.
Yeah, this would have caused enormous tidal waves. And evidence of just such waves about that time have been found around the Gulf of Mexico.
Mm-hmm. And then there's like a debris path, like I guess it's been sort of mapped that Chicxulub sort of came in at a southeastern angle. And so there's like a debris path all the way across the United States up into like Alberta.
Yeah, that would make sense. It would be a very big debris field.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one can never prove that an asteroid impact killed the dinosaurs. And in fact, many of the dinosaurs began dying off before this impact. There was a huge shift in Earth at this time. And based on where I am now with my geologic understanding of Earth and delving into the expanding Earth hypothesis, I think this was a time of expansion on Earth that led to the downfall of the dinosaurs.
I was thinking the same thing yesterday.
Yeah, Chicxulub was just icing on the cake.
Yeah. And it is interesting that because there's a big temperature drop before this asteroid ever even hits, like something like 6C. So it's interesting that they happen to coincide, that there's massive Earth changes and then we get hit with this giant asteroid.
Yeah,
like,
and then
what's the connection there? Because that seems to keep happening where we have multiple catastrophic events at the same time that are not necessarily causally related. Maybe they are, and that's what we need to figure out.
Yeah, because right after all this, then there's a massive rise in temperature, the Paleocene, Eocene optimum, and there's the largest volcanic eruption in on Earth, where there's 1 million square miles of material dumped out onto the continent of India.
Yeah.
The Deccan traps.
Yeah.
Okay, one can never prove that an asteroid impact killed the dinosaurs. Many species of dinosaurs and smaller flora and fauna had in fact died out over the millions of years preceding the KT event. The impact of a 10-kilometer wide asteroid would certainly have been an enormous insult to life on Earth. Locally, there would have been an enormous shockwave, heating and fires, tremendous earthquakes, hurricane winds, trillions of tons of debris thrown everywhere into the sky, into the atmosphere, into the stratosphere, and even space. It would have created months of darkness and cool temperatures globally. There would have been concentrated nitric acid rains worldwide. Sulfuric acid aerosols may have stayed in the stratosphere and cooled Earth for years. Life certainly could not have been easy for those species which did survive. Unfortunately, such impacts only occur about once every 100 million years.
I love how we have these estimates of how often stuff like this happens when we really know so little. It's funny. But I mean, just to put this in context, you and I talked about this yesterday. There's some estimates that like 90% of all of the plankton went extinct. So that in and of itself gives you a sense of the level of ecological disaster involved here, right? Because plankton are at the bottom of the food chain, and they probably died from not being able to photosynthesize because of lack of sunlight. So
you just turn the sun off for like 10 days, I bet you all plankton die.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
I mean, most plants would die.
Right.
So that's really interesting what's happening there. With the amount of plankton dying. But it's interesting also that not all large reptoids died. In fact, the crocodiles and alligators made it.
Sea turtles.
Yeah.
Some sea turtles, not all of them, but some, yeah.
And it depended where in that photosphere in the sea you were living, where you lived. And this comes to the ammonite nautiloid controversy.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you have a quick snippet on that?
Not exactly, but I mean, learned yesterday. Well, you knew about this already, that the ammonites didn't make it and nautiloids did, and it appears that's largely because of their differing ecological niches. So, like ammonites were doing more in shallow water, and nautiloids were operating more in deeper water. So, in that sense, the nautiloids had more protection from stuff like this.
Yeah, so they got fried up in the surface there, or
Yeah.
when everything was collapsing in that food chain, once the plankton collapsed, the ammonites couldn't feed
Right.
because they had nothing to feed on.
Well, and similarly, it seems that probably the microorganisms at deeper levels were more likely to make it than the shallower ones, that being their food source. So,
Okay, so you can even see this clay layer that we're in this picture, but not the people that are listening on the radio currently. So please rewatch the replay tonight on Magnetic Reversal News over at YouTube, where you can see some of the graphics we use.
that'll be 8 p.m. Mountain, 10 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah, so here it says 66 million years ago, this impact devastated the global environment, mainly through a lingering impact winter, which halted photosynthesis in plants, as well as plankton. So the impact hypothesis is also known as the Alvarez hypothesis, was then bolstered by the Chicxulub crater, which we just went over there.
Chicxulub.
Chicxulub. And a wide range of terrestrial species perished on this boundary. Best known as all the dinosaurs ended, with many mammals, birds, lizards, insects, plants, pterosaurs.
I was reading yesterday that like out of birds, there's like a huge plethora of birds that didn't make it. So if you're looking at, gosh, I'm not sure I have the right phylogenetic category, but it might be families. So like the ones that survived was like the group that is the descendant of things like ostriches. Then there's the group of that are descendants, the ancestors of chickens and ducks, and then like all other birds that we have now, like songbirds and stuff like that. So ostensibly there were huge numbers of other types of birds that we've never even seen.
Yeah, and then massive ocean predators like plesiosaur and mosasaur also gone. And huge numbers of sharks, mollusks, ammonites.
Oh, and by the way, we were talking about whales yesterday, right? Because whales largely eat plankton. So we were like, oh, well, how do they survive? Well, according to this, whales didn't really emerge until after the event.
Yeah, there are I think 45 million they emerged.
Yeah.
So the plankton came back because many species of plankton went extinct.
Yeah.
It's amazing. 75% or more of all species on Earth vanished.
Yeah. It's huge.
So this was a bad thing, but what it does is it provides evolutionary opportunities, which always occur during these events. And many groups underwent remarkable adaptive radiation, sudden and prolific divergence into new forms and species within the disrupted and emptied ecological niches. Mammals, in particular, diversified in the Paleogene. So had this not happened, this mass extinction, this whole sequence of events, you and I would not be here.
Probably not. You know what else is interesting about this conversation is that okay, the assumption here, like in this paragraph that you just read, right, is that these ecological niches open up that provide the opportunity to evolve. That idea leans really heavily on the idea of Darwinian natural selection. But as we discussed a couple of episodes ago, there's actually very good evidence for new genetic material arriving from space. Obviously, we have a huge space impactor here. So there's a big question here. How much of the ecological diversity that occurred after the KPG event is cosmic, and how much of it is really opportunistic based on what was happening on Earth, or both?
Yeah, both. Yeah, it's going to be both. It's like never one or the other. It's
Right.
going to be a cocktail of things.
Well, it's kind of the nature versus nurture argument in a way, right? Like the nature being the new genetic material that probably did arrive with this asteroid, but then also the nurture part of it, which is the ecological niches that have changed.
And paleontologically speaking, that's what we see in the fossil record. There's an event boundary, usually a catastrophe, and below it is the end of species, and above it is brand new species.
Mm-hmm.
There are no like missing link lineages. There's just new species that emerge from nothing. And in past podcasts, we've talked about cosmic rays affecting the genome. And then you have the addition of this cosmic stuff, these cosmic biologicals in the form of maybe viruses and other material.
Yeah, that's right. I left out the cosmic ray part.
So all that is possible. And then this is what we have. We have all these interesting new forms evolving, like horses, whales, bats show up. Now, bats are definitely from a different planet. Come on. Those are some creepy things.
That's interesting because this paper that we looked at, which I think maybe we'll get into later, does talk about basically like a super order that does include bats existing before the event.
Oh, maybe there was some giant like 800. Yeah, because if you know about the pterosaurs, those are the winged dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
They made it cross this boundary.
Yeah.
Yeah. So avian dinosaurs made it across, which is interesting. So that means our chickens are definitely dinosaurs.
Oh, chickens are absolutely dinosaurs. We know that chickens, the ancestors of chickens and ducks made it. That's one of the 3 groups of birds that we know made it.
Yeah. The surviving group of dinosaurs were avians, a few species of ground and waterfowl, which radiated into all modern species of birds.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we've got lizards taken off, and now we still have lizards all over the planet.
But also just to illustrate like how I don't know, maybe confusing and also ill-defined some of the phylogenetic relationships are, like this super order that mentions bats making it over the boundary of the event. The super order is called Loraciotheria, and it includes insectivores, bats, pangolins, and even an odd-toed ungulates. So like to us, those seem like very unrelated types of animals. That's a huge group. So that's something to think about.
Yeah, very interesting. And so right after this event, it gets warm on Earth, and it's this warming here that allows for the proliferation of all those new species into those ecological niches.
Mm-hmm.
And it's referred to as the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. It's also, they go on to talk about global warming. But there was actually, do you see this spike here?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is the transition from the Paleocene to the Eocene. And they estimate that that warming period lasted for 200,000 years, where global temperatures increased by 5 to 8 C. And it's really unexplainable.
Well, but it's interesting too, because it's in the middle of a temperature rise that's already occurring before the event.
Yep. And then at the same time, we've got the Deccan traps happening.
Mm-hmm.
The Deccan traps, here's the location on the continent of India. Trap is a Swedish word and refers to step-like hills forming the landscape of the region from flow after lava flow piling on top of each other. And they began forming 66.25 million years ago. That's before the event.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, is it? Because, I mean, maybe it's not. Because how precise is the estimate of the event exactly? I thought it was 66.5 million years ago, the event. Am I wrong?
65.5.
Oh, 65.5. Okay.
It's like a million years later. But all these things are happening within the same time. The
Yeah.
Deccan Traps explains why the dinosaurs were already dying off.
Yes.
You've got this eruption that's going on between 66 and 65 million years ago that is continuous. The series of eruptions may have lasted for 30,000 years.
Expansion.
So stay tuned for the second half.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Who owns you? If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine.
There was blood on the wire.
Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West.
There are lives in the balance, people under fire, children at the cannons.
Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio!
Join me on the Brian Ruhe Show on Revolution Radio, Eastern Standard Time, every Tuesday night from 6 to 8. We talk about the four most vital things, in my view, affecting all of humanity. Number one is UFOs and aliens and their agenda for the advancement of humanity. Number two is the Jewish establishment's control over all aspects of human civilization. Number three, the truth about Adolf Hitler, how he was the opposite of what we've been told. Number four is advanced ancient global civilizations. Join me on the Brian Ruhe Show, Tuesday nights from 6 to 8 on Studio B on Revolution Radio.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at higher risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
And we're back with the second half of Cosmic Catastrophe on Revolution Radio. I'm your host, Diamond. My lovely co-host and partner, Leah Shaper, is with us. You are muted.
I did it again. Darn it.
Okay,
Hello.
back in there. So we're going over a Geo 50 class on the current up-to-date information on what's going on the newly named KT boundary. It's now the KPG boundary, where 70% of all life on Earth goes extinct, 90% of all plankton, which basically kills off that biome. It's basically a collapse of the food chain. But there's new evidence that suggests little mammals made it, and that's why humans are here. And so it's a blessing that the Earth was destroyed 65.5 million years ago.
I suppose, yeah. I guess you can argue that. And also, I don't know that we know that it's just little mammals. I mean, we're talking like more specifically about placental mammals, right? Because those are some of our ancestors. But like I don't know exactly which, species and genuses existed and families existed, but if you go all the way back to like these super orders, there's like two main super orders that made it across the boundary, and they're there's a name for the two groups together. It's Eutheria, and what's interesting is that the commonality between them is that the male members of the species have scrotums.
Oh, yeah. I found that article about a fossilized scrotum.
Did you?
Yeah, I don't have it up here.
Well, then it made me think like, because we're talking about that there are big temperature shifts that are happening as well in this time period. Like, I don't know, maybe it's an advantage to have a scrotum in the sense that you have the opportunity to better regulate the temperature of your sperm when you have a scrotum. Like maybe it's something that simple.
The animals in the Eocene warm shortly after this were massive lumbering things that probably had gonads because it was hot out. They needed to cool the joules.
Right. And meanwhile, today we have people telling us that, male and female makes no difference to anything.
Uh-oh. Can you see the screen of the dead dinosaur?
I can.
All right, let's get, real quick, a recap on the Deccan traps. They began shortly before the Cretaceous tertiary boundary, which really ended the dinosaurs, that impact. But these were erupting for maybe 30,000 years on Earth. The original area covered by the lava flows is estimated to have been as large as 1.5 million square miles. That's half the size of modern India. That's crazy.
Yeah.
The Deccan Traps region was reduced to its current size by erosion and plate tectonics, and the present area of directly observable lava is around 500,000 square kilometers. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Now, the release of volcanic gases, specifically sulfur dioxide from these eruptions, probably changed the temperature. An average drop in temperature of 2°C at the beginning of the extinction event occurred during the period. So because of its magnitude, scientists have speculated that the gases released during the formation of the Deccan Traps played a major role in the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event.
Mm-hmm.
It's been theorized that sudden cooling due to sulfurous volcanic gases released by the formation of the traps and toxic gas emissions may have contributed significantly to the mass extinction.
Right. And then there's also acidification of the oceans, right? So that's going to change the life in the oceans dramatically as well.
So maybe that already began affecting the plankton communities, and then it gets dark and it's the death knell. This is similar to a Younger Dryas event where there's things layering on each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. Massive earthquakes, impacts, darkening of the skies, tsunamis, etc. So, work published in 2014 by geologist Goethe Keller, which I believe is probably correct here, and others on the timing of the Deccan volcanism suggests the extinction may have been caused by both the volcanism and then the impact event.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And this was followed by a similar study in 2015, both of which consider the hypothesis that the impact exacerbated or induced the Deccan volcanism. See, that's what we thought back in the 90s. Mm-hmm. That the impact cracked the earth, and that's why all this lava came out.
Right, but apparently the volcanism may have started before. And surely the impact had some effect.
Oh, yeah, maybe other volcanoes went off, but nothing that's this significant.
Yeah.
Which is why I think this may have had to do with an expansion event on Earth.
Mm-hmm. I agree completely.
Because it's kind of interesting. When you do the paleogeology of that time, there's not much of an Atlantic Ocean yet. Mm-hmm. See how everything is tightly packed in here?
Yeah.
and India is poorly formed. It's about to smash in here to Asia, and the Himalayas are about to form. They're about 45 million years old.
Yeah. And then this is also like a, part of a period that after a long, a long period of sea level lowering as well.
Yeah, from the cooling.
Right.
And then after the Cretaceous.
Well, and maybe
event,
also from expansion.
yes. But here we still have that stupid Tethys Ocean on the whole Earth.
Yeah. Yes.
So here, listen to this. This is 50 million years ago. All of that ocean is still there, and now it's missing. That doesn't make any sense. This is the paleogeography. The only way this can be explained is if the Earth was actually smaller and there was no Tethys Ocean.
Yeah.
Because you can't get rid of all that ocean plate in 50 million years.
Yeah.
That's a fraction of time on the geologic timescale. That's ridiculous. I think the geology is broken.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the paper. We got just about 20 minutes here. This is the paper, a time scale for placental mammal diversification based on Bayesian modeling of the fossil record. Now, it is very verbose, and this is not a paper for the layman. But real quick, I'll preface it. Let's go over what Bayesian modeling is.
Mm-hmm.
If you've ever scrolled through your spam folder and wonder how your email provider can filter your emails so successfully and only get like one or two wrong, it's so accurate because of Bayesian modeling. And this is a type of modeling that starts with a starting point, a data set, where you already know that you reject certain emails, right? And then as time goes on, it learns from more data from what you're rejecting and can easily determine in the future that you don't want to see that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the type of modeling that they used with the fossil record, because the fossil record is highly incomplete. The fact that there are even fossils is mind-blowing. I mean, it's such a rarity, which is why we barely have any human or hominid fossils at all. There's just a handful of them on the entire Earth, yet there have been millions and millions of people here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's, like you said, there's not that many fossils. So it's a little hard sometimes to wrap your head around how you can do this mathematical modeling based on what is essentially a fairly small subset of data, right? We don't know what we're not missing. But this modeling, this Bayesian modeling that they're doing here is partially in response to another technique of trying to assess species divergence, which is called molecular clock theory, which is even, in my opinion, is even more ridiculous, because this Bayesian modeling does rely on the fossils that we do have. The molecular clock modeling, if that's even the right term, is basically based on the idea that there's some kind of consistent rate of evolution over time, which, in my view, that is a huge assumption. And people do realize that, and they've made adjustments to this molecular clock thing, right? So that we can account for like a difference in evolutionary rate from one organism to another, or that the evolutionary rate changes as the species itself changes, right? So if there's an evolution into an organism that has a higher metabolic rate, their evolutionary rate may be faster. But all of this is entirely based on assumption. Like the idea that there's like some static rate, it's bizarre. Like we have no way of knowing it. It's hugely presumptuous.
Molecular clock was being used before punctuated equilibria was even proposed in 1990.
Right. Punctuated equilibrium is obviously a huge challenge to that.
Right. And so this is the assumption with molecular clock, which is incorrect if what we're saying is correct. That if you're looking in the fossil record and there's none of these things, and then all of a sudden you have the emergence of this complex thing that you find for the first time ever, they were saying back in the day that, well, it must have emerged earlier than this, than we found it, because it's so complex.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
which is
But-
inaccurate because what we find is here on this graphic here, we find patterns in the rock record of the emergence of animals. They either happen under the boundary, at the boundary, or past the boundary, so to speak. So we can actually find the occurrence of fossils at multiple localities occurring at different locations that aren't the same place.
Mhm.
That is direct observation. And based on what we're saying, that it's spontaneous speciation that we may actually be looking at when they emerged at that spot. There doesn't need to be a molecular clock. They don't necessarily have to have come from millions of years earlier.
Mhm.
It's just a false assumption based on a narrative that they made up.
Well, and it's also, it is, in my view, it's heavily reliant again on the concept of Darwinian natural selection, right? Like it basically presumes that at the outset, where, you know, even punctuated equilibrium challenges that, as well as, you know, these other theories that we've been talking about cosmic influences of genetic material. I mean, there's no basis on which to presume that we're going to get, let's say, cosmic genetic material on some sort of regular basis that would help create a rate of evolution. I mean, the whole concept to me is just ridiculous. And
Yeah, what we find-
oh, I don't even know where to find that. But I read a sentence somewhere that was saying, like, basically, well, we know that molecular clock doesn't really work, but we still use it because it's useful to make estimates. It's literally like saying this was the only tool we had, so even though it's wrong, we're just going to continue to use it.
A broken clock is right twice a day.
Yeah, basically. Speaking of clocks,
We're going to still use it. Twice a day, it's good.
Yeah, it's absolutely absurd. And frankly, I was like, I didn't know anything about this molecular clock modeling concept, and when I read about it, I was like embarrassed. Like absolutely embarrassed for the state of science, which is in the toilet.
Well, they've been looking for a missing link since like 1810. Like at some point, you got to be like, wait a minute, maybe there isn't any.
You know, and so much, I've run into stuff like this again and again and again whenever I've thought about evolution in general, right? So when I was in college, I studied philosophy of science in college for our audience. And, you know, so I took some classes in philosophy of biology. And on a regular basis, I just found myself seeing that there were assumptions again and again and again. Like, here we are in this little blip of geological time as humans, and somehow we think that we have the ability to step outside of evolution and see the whole process and understand how the mechanism works. And not to say that I have anything wrong with like theorizing and trying to figure out how all of this works, but I mean, here we are in this very anthropogenic perspective that we cannot escape simply because we're human beings living within the evolutionary spectrum. So to think that we can really like step outside all of this as if we're like God and really determine how all of this works and claim that there's constant rates of evolution or whatever is ridiculous. Anyway, there's my rant.
Okay, well, here, let's just, for those that are going to be watching tonight, this is a great example of what evolution really is. And it isn't anything like you've been told. It's a series of mass extinctions and complete reworkings of the Earth, where it goes from one paradigm to a completely new paradigm. The great example is the Cambrian explosion. We went from single-celled algae to complex organisms across a boundary. There are no missing links. There's no explanation. It has to be that material came from outside of Earth to allow this to occur. The same thing happens at all of these geologic boundaries. Cambrian to Ordovician, Ordovician to Silurian. The Silurian to the Devonian, all of a sudden there were fish on the other side of a boundary one day. There was no evolution to fish. There was all of a sudden fish. I mean, there is no evolution going on. What there is panspermia during catastrophes.
I don't know if I entirely agree with you on that. I mean, I'm kind of more of the mind that, yes, we do get this cosmic genetic material that enters, but it's not like the genetic material itself is going to like spontaneously turn into an organism. Like, I think that, like we talked about this in a couple of episodes ago, like one of the things that you see at the Cambrian is that suddenly there's a bunch of retroviruses that show up in the ocean that have the ability to essentially integrate themselves into a genome. So you've got the new material getting integrated into existing genomes on Earth. And so in that sense, I do think that there is some amount of evolution because there is a genetic relationship between some species, and you can kind of see that if you look at phylogeny.
Because you have to have a complete change in the old species to a new one over a boundary. We call that geologically instantaneous.
Yeah.
Basically, you can have a boundary that represents 14,000 years. That is a lot of generations.
Yeah.
So in that geologic instant, which is not visible in any sedimentary way, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can immediately have enough genetic mutation. And so what's happening as we move up here, there's more oxygen on Earth. And so at some point during one of these catastrophes, the amphibian-like creatures that were living in the water mutated and were able to breathe air, and then they took over that niche for the first time during a catastrophe. You had to have the genetics from the weird slimy thing. He then was able to breathe air, and he became the new thing.
Right. And so then that sort of resolves the issue of like why you do see relationships in the phylogeny, even if we don't have them all teased apart and figured out.
Now, we don't know about the octopus so much, so.
Well, yeah, we talked about that in a couple of episodes ago. Wow, is that fascinating how the octopus made huge genetic leaps in a short period of time that we, phylogenetically, we can't really explain.
And then the geologic history of Earth is almost like a movie. As we move up through the Paleozoic, land becomes this amazing jungle through the Permian, and it's a huge lush jungle. And then a catastrophe happens at 252, and then we've got these insane alien reptiles called dinosaurs eating everything. Back. And they start off small. They're small. They're only like 12 inches high, like a bird. But they're voracious. They're like velociraptor. They can chomp and anything.
I was going to mention earlier that at the KPG event, apparently pretty much all of the birds with teeth were wiped out. And I thought to myself, wow, I'm really thankful for that. Because that sounds really scary. Or any of the, any of the avian dinosaurs, the flying dinosaurs. Are not here anymore. And I'm kind of
thankful. Because they could just pick us up
and really freaks me out.
All of a sudden you're getting flown away and your head gets bit off.
It's just like of all of the dinosaurs, I find those the most terrifying to think about.
Well, here's an interesting lesson in dinosaurs. Starting at 252, so they were around for 190 million years old. 190 million years. They got bigger as time went on. They didn't start gigantic.
Yeah.
It's only at the very end we have these gigantic dinosaurs.
Which would potentially lend credence to the idea that expansion had already begun before the KPG event.
Yeah. Yeah, it did, because during the KPG event, the Atlantic was already probably 1,000 miles wide. A third of the size it is now?
Yeah.
I'm just guessing. I have no idea how wide the Atlantic is. All right, so what did you glean from this paper? They ran a model. They used Bayesian modeling to learn from their mistakes. Now, here's what's weird. This is a new article, just came out. I mean, you and I discussed that they had known there was mammals during the time of dinosaurs way before this paper. So what does this paper actually do?
I had a hypothesis about that. Gosh, what was it? So apparently, the idea is that the placental mammals already existed before the event. Something like 57% of them were wiped out. Gosh, what was I had a good revelation about this, and now I've forgotten it. Darn it. So what? Well, I mean, I think the thing is that we have the fossils for the placental mammals after the KPG event. And that's all we have fossil-wise. But obviously, and this is like immediately after the KPG event. So if the fossils are there at that time, it certainly suggests that they had to have existed before The fossils are the end of life of the animal, not the origin of the animal. Why we can't find the fossils before the KPG event is the issue here. But there are some, because that's what this Bayesian modeling is based on. This is such an interesting diagram you have up, by the way. You're muted.
Yeah, the primates in this extension here go back to 90 million years ago.
Yeah.
That would be well into the Cretaceous.
Yes. Yeah.
So that means primate ancestors would have been commingling for 40 million years with dinosaurs.
Well, and this is a group. It's a super order group, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name because I will try. You are Contoglines?
You're a Contoglines. Yeah.
What?
Yeah, the rodentia. They're rodents.
But it's not just rodents. It's rodents, it's lagomorphs, which I think are like rabbits and hares, tree shrews, certain primates, and colugos. I don't know what those are. So it's a large group.
According to this chart, they go back 90 million.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this range here might be molecular clock range, and then the darker area might be the actual fossils that they're finding.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it sort of seems like the assumption before was that because we typically only see the fossils after the event, well, they must not have existed before. But clearly that's not the case.
Yeah. And a pretty significant one, because had we not made it past that KT boundary, we wouldn't be doing this podcast.
Probably.
Now, some people think that we're not supposed to be here, and we are primates that made it past there that were then experimented on, and that's why we're so smart right now. How do you feel about that?
Well, I don't know about the intelligence element of it, but I mean, you and I have talked about this many times, as have many other people. Why is it that we're the mammals on Earth that need to wear clothes? Stuff like that. I mean, clearly we're a bit different than most other mammals. Why? I mean, this is always an interesting factoid to me. The reason that we, unlike every other mammal on Earth, emerge as completely helpless the way we are. We can't walk, we can't talk, we can't feed ourselves, we can't do any of that stuff, is because of these large heads that we have, which also has a connection to our vocal cords. So the fact that we can talk and communicate the way our vocalization is structured is related to the size of our heads. And obviously the size of our heads has bearing on how we're birthed. So if we were any bigger and more independent than we are when we're born, we'd never make it out of the birth canal. So that's interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we have the maximum proportion that's possible by natural law.
Right, which forces us to be born in this completely dependent state, which you would think would have a very negative effect on our ability to survive and proliferate, but apparently not.
Yeah, because
it's like the intelligence. It's almost like the intelligence makes up for it.
Yeah, if anyone gets near your baby, you hit them with a club.
Well, which is what any other mammal would do, right?
Right. Well, and humans, we've been alive with the same cranial capacity since the Lachamp for 41,000 years. People that look and think like us have been running around Earth. And at that time, there were megafauna. Everything wanted to eat you. Can you imagine? Yeah. For 30,000 years, we lived with saber-toothed cat.
Yeah.
Giant cave bear.
Right.
Just insane.
Right. And we wonder why we, probably spent a lot of time in caves.
Yeah, you can protect that entrance pretty easily.
Right, right.
But first you got to make sure there's no cave bear in there.
Yes.
So the good news is the KT event happened. It's the largest impact in recent geologic history. It was 65.5 million years ago. And it's the reason why we're here. And guess what? We made it through the next largest mass extinction, which was the Younger Dryas event. That's only 12,900 years ago. So we have the ability to survive these events. We've done it twice. So it appears no matter what happens to Earth, we're probably not going anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then just look at our ability to proliferate, right? I mean, we have a population right now of 8 billion people, which in, I don't know, like 1945 or so was, I don't know, maybe like 3 billion. I mean, that's such a huge, and it's not, we're not rabbits, right? We're not pumping out babies at like an absolutely extraordinary rate. I mean, although you could argue that perhaps we do, right? If you look back and like, I've looked at my own mother's genealogical tree, and there's periods of time where you've got women who are giving birth to like 10 plus babies in their life, which is extraordinary. And obviously we don't do that anymore, but what?
That's the show. I hope you enjoyed it, guys. Check us out at the Crestone Energy Fair Tuesday, July 4th. Lee and I will be there all day.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.